From outer space, a sunrise illuminates planet Earth. Imagine, build, include. Ability Summit 2022. Inclusive design in the heart of an organization. Christina Malley, Bas Korsten, Sinead Burke, and K.R. Liu. Christina Mallon.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining today. I'm Christina Mallon, and I'm a designer with dual arm paralysis and currently the head of inclusive design at Microsoft. I'll be your moderator today for our discussion on inclusive design in the heart of an organization. I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists to this conversation. I'm going to start with Sinead Burke. Sinead is a disabled educator, advocate, and author who champions accessibility, equity, and social justice to build a better world for everyone. In 2020, she founded the accessibility consultancy Tilting the Lens on the 3 pillars of education, advocacy, and design, advising major global brands, including Gucci, Ralph Lauren, Netflix, Pinterest, and Starbucks. Tilting the Lens guides clients in their move from awareness to action by creating more accessible practices, policies, products, services, places, and promotions. And our next panelist is KR. She's a leader in the area of disability inclusion and LGBTQ rights. She's been on the forefront of issues blazing a trail towards inclusive design and marketing for more than 20 years. Diagnosed with severe hearing loss at the age of 3, she made it her life's work to be a strong advocate for disabled people. As the head of brand accessibility at Google Brand Studio, she drives innovation of representation and storytelling for diverse disabled audiences, a segment that historically has been overlooked. And next up is Baz, is the Global Chief Creative Officer of Wunderman Thompson, which is one of the world's largest agencies. Baz and his team's ambition and commitment to creativity and innovation has won 34 Lions, 11 D&AD pencils, among which a Black's pencil for his work for Free a Girl, social justice, and plus numerous international awards. Last year, his team won a Grand Prix for Degree Inclusive. In 2016, Baz was honored by Ad Age Creativity 50, listing him with the 50 most creative people of the year. And he's been selected by Adweek as one of the 10 global creative leaders who are reinventing advertising and the ad industry. So I'm going to start off with, I think, what is one of the most important questions, and one that we always get asked is, organizations and brands like the idea of inclusive design, but sometimes don't allocate the necessary resources to implement it. How do you get them to allocate resources for inclusive design? And what's been challenges so far? Who wants to start with that question?
Panelists grin.
Because I know there's been challenges, so I'll have to be real here.
Bas Korsten.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think people in general underestimate the importance of inclusive design for brands and organizations, not only from a perspective where it's about creating a fair and more inclusive world for everyone, but also from a business perspective. If you think about how many people have some form of disability around the world, the business impact of catering to that audience is immense, and I think that is something that is widely overlooked. Now, at the same time, I don't think that a lot of people are acutely aware of how many people have some kind of disability, and that everyone in our lifetime will at some point in time be faced with some kind of disability, hearing loss, loss of sight. So it's important for brands to open their eyes to that group of people that is growing and that will always be growing. So I think that is important.
Sinead Burke.
This is Sinead speaking. I might jump in next, and I was going to go first, but just as I did, my dog started barking, and I was laughing at KR talking about her dog earlier. So we were saved by Cookie almost. But I think what Baz was talking about there, to build on, in thinking about this notion around resources for inclusive design, I think the first point is beginning to think about inclusive design or accessibility or universal design. I do think we need a shared understanding of the differences and a global ambition to which one or all that we are striving to achieve with that terminology, but to look at it as an investment and rather than a cost, and to look at this as by design rather than by need. Because what we know is that if we're creating inclusive design by need or accessibility at the point in which a disabled person has a mismatch with the environment or with a product, we know that that comes at a cost of between 40 to 100% more than the original investment that was required. So this is about building this in from the very beginning of the product innovation or the policy development. And I think understanding that is important. The business case is fundamental. Whether we want to acknowledge the challenges or the values of living within a capitalist society, if we don't make this core to the business agenda of every organization, this will become a nice to do rather than something that is a core functionality of every workflow. So understanding that 2 blind people exit out of an e-commerce transaction per month because of the lack of digital accessibility and inclusive design is important. Acknowledging that there is a billion disabled people, but to Baz's point, after a pandemic, which was a mass disabling event, means that there are more of us than ever. Looking at that market value is incredibly important. But it's also fundamental to acknowledge that 50 to 75% of disabled people are outside of the market for employment. So if we don't have inclusive design in terms of our office spaces, in terms of our studios, in terms of our products, we actually can't increase that figure, which in turn will increase the market value and the spending power too. So looking at this as an investment is about the long-term sustainability of our business, which in turn will increase better product, better innovation. And I think looking at it as a fundamental principle from the very beginning, I think is the only way we really move forward.
K.R. Liu.
Well said, Sinead. I mean, I think from where I stay, I stay in marketing, right? But for many years, I was sitting in product, and often we were pushing to help people understand why accessibility was important in product design from the beginning. But what has shifted and has been really interesting to see is it's great if your product is accessible and you're thinking about disabled people, but if the content and the marketing and the advertising you're putting out in the world doesn't speak to that audience, they're never going to know about the product or see that the product is for them. And so it's been exciting to see, even in Google's rich history of having built accessible products, recognizing that we were not great at the storytelling, the authenticity of people being able to see themselves out there, and advertising, less than 2% of people with disabilities are represented. So there's a lot of work to be done there. So when I think about inclusive design, I'm not just thinking about product, I'm thinking about, advertising, media, content, because so many people resonate when they see themselves out there in a piece of content. And so looking at that process in the beginning as well in parallel with the design process when you're talking about the product that you're marketing out in the world is also equally important, and is a new practice in some ways that people are starting to recognize the power of that when you do that. But also making sure that the product that you're speaking about is also something that's, available and ready to be there, and not just something that you're marketing to see if somebody's interested in. That really is something that the market will have access to and can help not only people with disabilities, but to Brad's point, everyone at some point will experience a disability, and that can be temporary, right? And pandemic, like Sinead said, definitely has elevated that visibility. As someone with severe hearing loss, mask is like a horrible thing because I can't lip read anymore. So you've taken away my ability to communicate. And so that's where technology plays a really powerful role. But I think that when we're thinking about inclusive design and universal design, we have to think about both sides, not just product, but think about the marketing, the content, and the story you want to tell, and making sure those two are connected and thought about from the very beginning.
And just to build on Kara's point there, when you were doing those brilliant introductions at the beginning, Christina, you were talking about degree and you were talking about the awards that Baz and the team so rightly won. I think it's also about measuring success and impact. I think we have this vision that it must be perfect in order to exist. And as a Virgo and a perfectionist, I feel that thinking, but it's also not the reality. Done is far better than perfect. But also, how do we measure the short-term investments that we are making to then build to the long term? Because if we're always thinking about the strategic ambition of who we want to be, the products we want to create, the marketing campaigns we want to build up until 2030, it's too long. We need to be acknowledging the wins now to then create a momentum about building investment back in. But I think one of the challenges that we have when we think about inclusive design is how do we build a financial structure around doing this with disabled people rather than just for disabled people? Is that about recruitment within our organizations? Is that about external consultants, individuals with lived experience and co-design? And how are we budgeting for that process? Because often we have great intentions, but sometimes we're too far along in the critical path before we realize that we need that lived experience and expertise, and we have no budget. So how do we ensure that in terms of our financial sustainability within this work, that we are ensuring that the community is benefiting from this as more than just the consumer or the customer?
That's a really great point. And I think, what I got from your input and the team's inputs here is that inclusive design needs to be from beginning to end. And it also needs to be co-designed. And that there are so many people in this world that experience disability, and it's extremely important to co-design with them from the beginning to the end. I would love to understand kind of what are some of the hiccups that you have seen that brands or organizations experience when trying to implement inclusive design, so that our audience can avoid those.
Well, I can say something to that. So what we experienced, for instance, with Degree Inclusive, the project that you mentioned before, is that it is specific to very to very specific disabilities, and there are so many different disabilities out there. How do we make sure that, because you can't solve it all in one product, so you have to really be cognizant of the fact that you need to start. And I think to Sinead's point, that is so important, because if we would have tried to fix it all up front, it would have never seen the light of day. We just ran with it. We did it. We made some mistakes, but then we also learned that we were letting people out, not consciously or not on purpose, but we left people out because we didn't design for everyone. So I think doing something, going out there, and then learning about it, and to Sinead's point as well, involving the community as much as we can, because I think that is usually, at least what we've seen happening, is thinking for communities with disabilities rather than engaging them because it's made for them. So how can you not involve them in the design process and co-design with them? So those were a few of the hurdles that we encountered.
I'd like to jump in on that. I also think within organizations, we tend to lean a lot on our own disabled employees, and they may have lived experiences, but they might not be experts in the space that you're trying to think about. And it's also emotionally taxing when you're constantly going to them and they're like, I don't want to be the person that has to always answer this question. But it's also helpful when you bring in outside perspective that gets you outside of that company lens in your way of doing things. And they see things that you may miss because you're so into your process internally or the way that you work on things. And so that's been really helpful in being better at what we do, is you get that outside perspective that actually calls you out and says, no, that's not the direction you should be going. Why don't you back up a bit and look at this direction? And it makes the work better. And then taking that, making sure you're taking those learnings forward and showing the process and the case study of how that happened, right? And continuing that communication. And that also builds trust, right? That builds trust within the community, that builds trust with outside people. And to Sinead's point, we have, incredibly disabled talented people out there who are trying to get their foot in the door, and getting that work with these organizations, especially big companies, that helps them, grow in their career and build their portfolios and be able to influence the work. And that's what we want, right? We want, especially on the creative side, deeply passionate about like building that disabled creative pipeline. That we don't have a lot of people out there with the experience that we need, but how can we grow that and build that? So that's also been a learning in our side. It's like, go outside of your organization, trust that expertise that you bring in, because they'll have sometimes much better ideas than your own organization, and implementing that can be quite powerful.
I think that's such a great point. And KR speaking there about leaning on the internal employee resource group or people who self-identify as disabled, which we know if you're not visibly disabled can be an incredibly challenging thing to do. And then to place that emotional burden on people to answer questions around language or whatever it might be, they're probably not financially compensated to do that additional work. And yet not everybody feels like an expert or feels comfortable doing that. So I think finding external supports is so important. A couple of challenges that I've come across within this space is how we think intersectionality within this work. I think for such a long time when we talk about diversity, the disabled community have felt excluded from that conversation, and we have lots of evidence to prove that. But as we move to thinking about what intentional, holistic inclusion of disabled people looks like within the practice of inclusive design, we have to think about multiple marginalization, intersectionality, and those hard to reach communities that are part of the disabled community, because we cannot merely cater to the white, cisgendered, physically disabled person who identifies as he, him. Our community is much broader of a spectrum than that, and it requires greater work, greater creating of spaces and equitable spaces through a lens of disability justice in order to make that meaningful. I do a lot of work in the design and fashion spaces, much like Christina. And I think what I'm seeing is two trends around how do we think about the future of co-design, but also othering by design. I think there was a great mentality and mindset around adaptive fashion. But how do we ensure that adaptive fashion does not become othering to the market that we are deigning to cater for? Again, this comes back to doing it with disabled people, not for disabled people. But how do we not look at a capsule collection as the solution, but look at customization and the principles of inclusive design as something that should radicalize the industry as a whole, rather than making a jumper with a magnet or a zip? And I think the other piece is how do we think about the long-term sustainability of the careers of disabled people? Because whilst we can involve them in a process and a design sprint for co-design, but actually if we're not creating a pipeline of talent that's also rooted in education, so if we're not creating bursaries and scholarships through academic institutions that have accessible infrastructure, a difficult Venn diagram to find, but also ensuring that we're not just thinking about people as a one-stop project, but providing employment opportunities should they wish to be employed within our companies and not self-employed, and making sure that they're moving through the organization. So we're not just thinking of people as co-design, but that in time they will get to lead and design those projects, because that's where we want to strive towards, where we have disabled people in leadership positions, because that's when inclusive design will become part of the workflow, because it's part of our lived experience and our own independence and agency. And I think that's where we need to move and shift our thinking, rather than momentary changes and successes, but kind of long-term systemic adaptations that we can, build a better world.
I mean, again, end-to-end inclusion internally and externally at organizations, and that leads to the best work. And ensuring that there's maturity models to your plans, and you have 5 to 10-year plans. That isn't just, a one-off. And I think that is what I hope for the future of inclusive design. So I'd love to understand, all of you are really, esteemed individuals in inclusive design and have done so much great work. Besides kind of looking at the papers and kind of following you on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, are there any other recommendations for our audience to learn about inclusive design? Because there's really not many organizations around inclusive design or kind of college degrees in inclusive design. So how can you learn more about inclusive design?
I'll start. I really think it is with networking. Like I've learned from each of you as I've met you throughout my journey and wanting to better understand this world that we're working and seeing it grow. I know we talk about social media as one aspect, but in that you do end up connecting with people, and those are relationships that you build personally, professionally, and that leads to other doors being open to meeting others. And until we have a platform that's really dedicated to us all connecting, that is really the way that I've seen that happen. And I'd say LinkedIn is a great tool for that. I've used LinkedIn for years before Microsoft bought it. But it has been like an incredible networking platform to learn about everyone's work. And but I do think that's a good idea, Christina, is it would be cool if there was at some point a platform that connected our community together, because people do constantly try to find, who do I work with? Where do I find someone? I personally love Jillian Marcado's initiative, Black Disabled Creatives. She did a fabulous job building that during the pandemic. And that's a resource we've actually used quite a few times. And we need more of that. I think there's gaps that we need to fill. That's one for sure.
I have a whole library that I would recommend. I'm sitting here in my home office, and above my head is like a bookshelf of what I call like the tilting the lens library. And so everything from Kat Holmes's Mismatch to Accessible America to alt text as poetry. I think there are some really incredible resources out there that, depending on your interest, whether it's social media and digital, whether it's more environmental in the development of cities, or whether it's thinking about specific product innovations, there's some really key texts that are also available on audiobook, if that's a more accessible platform for you, and some really excellent podcasts too. If it's useful for anybody who is participating in this session, if you email us at office@tiltingthelens.com, we'll share what is our working library, and would love if there are documents or books or podcasts or texts that other people can recommend that we'll add to that. We really try to prioritize disabled authors, but know that there's so many great allies working within the space, contributing to the broader theory of thought too.
Like Oprah's books.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't have any other good advice than to work with Christina Mallon, because that's what I did. And that's why I'm on this call to begin with. And I think what Christina did, and basically seeing her in action, to me, opened my eyes in such a big way that I'm now trying to do the same with other people around me and with other brands that we work for. So that's how I try to spread. I mean, of course, it's not great advice for people that want to get into inclusive design per se.
Good advice for Jenny Leigh Fleury, though.
Yes. Hey, guy, I mean, the good advice, if you reach out to me on any of the platforms, I'm here to help. And I think, Wunderman Thompson has some really great one-pagers on inclusive design that I think will really help, especially people in college that are very new and looking for resources.
Absolutely. And of course, that should have been my answer. But no, but that's true. And we're trying to, and that's what I love about the inclusive design practices that we have, that you started, Christina, is that it spreads like wildfire. And I think because we make it, even the inclusive design learnings, we make them accessible for everyone. That is how you create this momentum and this movement. So yeah, definitely, you can all reach out to me, and we'll have one-pagers that I can send.
So I always love to ask this in my, when I'm moderating, is what is some inclusive design work that you're jealous of and wish you worked on?
Oh, I can jump in first for this one. For me, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it was designed as a beacon or a project for inclusive design, but it's the Guggenheim Museum. I use it as an example of how we think about accessibility or inclusive design, not within a format of compliance, but within creativity. It is an arts space that is built on a ramp. And it doesn't matter if you are a wheelchair user, a person who uses mobility aid, a little person, a parent with a stroller, someone who's older. More or less everyone has a similar experience in that space because of the way Frank Lloyd Wright designed the arc up to the ceiling. And so often when we think about a ramp, our framing of that is so entrenched in the medical model and thinking of disability as less, that we haven't encouraged ourselves to be imaginative about what could be possible if we think about creativity as a principle and a rationale and an output of inclusive design. So I kind of think about the ramp as something that, yes, exists on an architecturally protected building over some concrete steps, and it's silver and metal and clunky, but it is also the Guggenheim. It is also a fashion runway. And yet those are two spaces where we rarely see physically disabled people present unless on one-off occasions. So for me, I think I would love to have been in the room where it happened, where conversations were being undertaken as regards to how the Guggenheim was mapped out. And then I think I would have loved to have been in the marketing department to be able to communicate that this was a space for almost everyone. That's mine.
I don't know. Mine would be Sinead's Gucci outfits. I swear, I'm a huge fashion person. I'm wearing like St. Laurent today in her honor. My fashion game where I'm going to be in the room with Sinead. But I have a passion around seeing more in fashion. And just having been in tech for so many years, it's like you want to shift culture. You want to shift like really. It's interesting. Like I'm a huge sneaker collector. People who know me know I have a huge sneaker collection. And when you walk down the street and you see someone else with really cool sneakers, like the who you are, like whether you're queer like myself or you have a disability, that goes away in just this connection and talk about sneakers and that passion about sneakers. And there's something in that. And then you get to know each other. Then you want to learn more. It breaks down barriers. Fashion really does break down barriers. And it's a way of expressing yourself and your identity. And I want to see more disabled people in that world. And Sinead's done a great job of like really trying to lead that movement. And that's something I'm jealous of because I'm right. So even cool partnerships and stuff, but not that cool. So that's something I hope to see more of because I really think it really just there's something about that in pop culture and fashion just really does like change the conversation and the perception of disability in a big way.
Yeah, I love action audio, which basically allows people with blindness or visual impairment to follow the tennis experience in real time. So it uses like the real-time ball position on the field and makes the ball almost audible to people that are visually impaired. And that's, I mean, for me, when I'm jealous, it's because it is the inspiration level of the project that I know is going to inspire more inclusive design projects, and I feel that's the case with this one as well.
I participate in a. Sorry.
Oh, no, go. No, I was just
going to say
that was done by a partner of ours.
Well, I think that speaks true that you should always work with Christina Mallon. I hope that is the title for this panel. If it's not, I'm going to revolt. But it reminded me what Baz was speaking to there about a project that I got to participate in last year with the Irish Architecture Foundation, which was about their Open House Festival, which is based here in Ireland, which is about making historic buildings that are usually for government use or for company use available to the public. And because they are architecturally protected buildings and historic, it means they are inaccessible to many disabled people. But we partnered with IRA, which is based out of the US on the West Coast on a pro bono basis, to make every one of those buildings, for the first time ever, accessible to people who are blind and low vision. And speaking with a focus group of people afterwards, blind people saying that they are so busy day to day fighting for their rights to education, to employment, to access, that the notion of entertainment and leisure is something that is never part of even the conversation, because your human rights at a very minimum level are constantly up for negotiation. And the idea that they would get to enjoy themselves, and that could be a practice that they did day to day, for me, it felt radical in how ordinary it should be, and proved that even when infrastructure is inaccessible, there are modern, even digital solutions to help build it. So for me, I was grateful to play a tiny part in it, but I'm kind of envious and jealous that I isn't part of the team at IRA just day to day. I don't think they'd have me. They'd be quite right not to.
No, they would love to have you. And that's the great thing about technology. And that's why, some of the projects I'm so excited about working at Microsoft, because people don't realize these small changes can have a huge effect on someone's life. And I know we have 10 minutes left, so I want to give each of you time to kind of just open up. And if there's anything that you want to tell viewers or advice that you have, because, there isn't a lot of resources out there on inclusive design. And we want to make sure that viewers walk away understanding how they can make action within their organization or brand.
I like to start. I think the biggest piece of advice I have is, and this is personal, is to Sinead's point earlier, is disability is not one part of who we are. And there are areas, whether you're talking about LGBTQ plus or gender equity or racial equity, disability is the red thread through all of that often. And when you add layers of your identity to disability, it gets even harder to be seen in areas that you're really passionate about. So when you're thinking about inclusive design, you're thinking about marketing, you're thinking about storytelling, like I always say, think about all aspects of who the person is and who you're trying to reach and the impact that can have, especially on marginalized societies, who often get kind of not thought about. And so I think it's important that when you're thinking about disability, think about that as one part, right? I often say, I'm not queer one day, disabled the next day, and a woman the next day. I'm those three things all the time. So be mindful of that. When you're in a position of power or influence, and you can shift somebody's perspective into thinking about disability or accessibility, you should. It's a responsibility you have. And you shouldn't take that lightly, and open doors and opportunities for others when you can. Let them in, let them share their ideas, give them a safe space, because often the best ideas come from that. And so that would be a big takeaway I want people to think about, is like, who's not in the room? I always ask that question. Who is not in the room that should be in the room when you're making decisions, especially around anything disability or accessibility related? Make sure that voice is represented. And even if you do have disability voices in the room, when you're talking about those other layers, if you don't identify with them, you shouldn't be speaking. Bring the right person in. So that's something I want people to be really mindful of.
Well, and thanks, Kiara. I think the title of a session that Christina and I did around Cannes was "Not Inclusive is Exclusive," and that is something that I've learned, at least, is you need to be actively aware. You need to be actively inclusive, because otherwise you're actively exclusive. And the way that I look at brands, and because that is part of my job, is to go back to the purpose of a brand, to the why, as to why they exist, and then to challenge if that is a true inclusive statement. So the reason why we were able to get Degree Inclusive made was when we challenged the client on their purpose. Their purpose is, and Degree is a deodorant, which is Rexona in most parts of the world, Sure in England, and Degree in the US. And their purpose is to inspire in everyone the confidence to move more. And we said, well, are you truly inspiring in everyone the confidence to move more if people can't open your packaging, your product? And I think once you've made people aware of them being actively exclusive by not, like, almost carelessly using a word like everyone in their purpose, I think that is a great place to start. When you want to be more inclusive, is go back to why your company exists in the first place, and then making sure that you involve as many people as you can, preferably everyone. So I think that would be my my main lesson, is just to go back to the core and then challenge it for inclusivity.
I think that's so powerful, and that notion of inclusivity is an action that has to be done with intent. And if you're not undertaking that intentional action, you're excluding. Because I think we have this visceral hope, maybe, that it kind of happens accidentally. And maybe for some of us with our lived experience and our identities, we are more prone to it because it's within our muscle memory, but it still requires great intent. I think for me, some of what has already been discussed around the importance of intersectionality is really key. But I think as we move through this work, asking who is not in the room, is really fundamental and important. But I think it's also about taking a holistic approach to this work. Sometimes I have slight concerns about the different vocabulary and terminology that we do use to engage the community, but also to think about this work. As we shared earlier, is it universal design? Is it inclusive design? Is it accessibility? And do they mean different things depending on the industry or the product? Is it accessibility if we're talking about the WCAG 2.0 standard and it's digital accessibility? Do we mean inclusive design when it's just product and the adaptive Xbox controller? Do we talk about universal design when it's something more fundamental like a building? I think the reason why at Tilting Lens we work through people, places, product, and promotion, so that's quite the large plate we have given ourselves, is because if this work is not holistic, it's not a movement, it's just a moment. So whilst we can have inclusive design processes for product, are we also making sure that we're asking people in a job description at the very earliest stage if they have any accessibility requirements or if they require any support to fill out the form or to, have a phone call with somebody and somebody to read it through them or to them or engage with an interpreter? Are we providing the salary and the level of health insurance and the level of vacation time that is available to someone or maternity leave on a job description so that they know if a disabled person, if they're based in the US, that they have access to the healthcare that they need? Sometimes we are so focused on the output that we don't think about the pathway of how a person gets there. And we really need to come up with some sort of holistic solution to bring these inclusive principle designs from the very beginning of a person's journey to the point in which we create that product for the billion people who exist with a disability. And I think we need to just be broader in our mindset and more intentional and intersectional in our focus, because yes, having inclusive design products is great, but we need to take smaller steps too. And I think if I was to give anybody recommendations, it'd be so bold of those who are participating in this session. Yes, think about long-term investment for broad, significant change within your organization. But begin to embed policies in your own day-to-day practice of, if you're still remote working, are you ensuring that captions are starting at every point? If you're using Microsoft PowerPoint and you're sharing a presentation, do you have the box ticked as regards to subtitles and caption? Because we know that has fundamental value for more than disabled people, but for everyone. If you're no longer remote working, why? Are you ensuring that disabled people have access to the office space, feel safe doing so? If the mask mandate has been lifted, does everybody feel safe doing that? Because I think it's easy for us to think about the end product. It's really hard and complicated to think about people, but we'll never build product if we don't set people up for success. So I'd ask people to think broader.
I love that, Sinead. Thank you so much. Well, everybody, we're coming to a close, but want to give a huge, huge thanks to Sinead, KR, and Baz for making this amazing conversation around inclusive design and providing, your time to educate our viewers. Have a great rest.
Such a treat. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a treat having you all.
Panelists, smile.
Thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day, guys.
Thank you for joining us. Ability Summit 2022.